All set. Should I go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I want to make a couple of quick announcements about the rest of the program for the semester. We have a class on December 2nd and another one on December 16th. There's a break now for the next 2 weeks. And then after the 16th, or on the 16th, excuse me, we're going to be having our last discussion group. So there's 2 more seminars after this upcoming break in November, followed by our last discussion on the 16th. And I would just like to encourage everyone to make sure that you visit the Canvas site to get the details on when the final paper is due and the guidelines for producing the final paper, which we've discussed in previous classes. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Ed Mabaya. Ed is a senior research associate in the Department of Global Development, and he considers himself both an academic and a development practitioner, which I really appreciate. He's one of these people who is able to, kind of bridge the gap, which used to be a gap, not so much a gap anymore, between development and research. And Ed's been instrumental in doing that the whole time I've known him for the last 20 years or so here at Cornell. He's involved in several programs that seek to improve the lives of African farmers through private enterprise. And he has more than a decade of research and outreach experience in the development of Africa's seed sector, benefiting primarily African smallholders. Ed has a number of distinguished awards. And in addition to having earned his PhD and his master's here at Cornell. And today, the title of his talk is Getting Improved Seed to Smallholder Farmers, Findings from the African Seed Access Index. So welcome, Ed. It's great to have you talking to us today.
Thank you so very much for that kind introduction, and good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are. It's quite a rainy fall day here in Ithaca. Looking out of my window, it looks very gray. But I'm going to be talking to you today about getting improved seed to smallholder farmers in Africa, sharing some findings from the African Seed Access Index. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, that I've been doing some work in this space for the last about 15 years or so. So the outline of my presentation is going to be structured somewhat as follows. I'll give you the context of or problem statement of agriculture in Africa. Then I'll try to make the case here for improved seed. I know some of you might have an agricultural background, some of you might not, but I really want to make a strong case of why we should look at improved seed. Then I'll look at seed systems in Africa. Then I'll introduce this African Seed Access Index, an initiative that I've been working over for a while. Then I'll end with sharing some key findings of what we're finding out from that work. Let me just put maybe a key definition into perspective. When I say improved seed, what do I mean? Improved seed just generally means that seed that has gone through some breeding program to make it perform better. Often this is done in public research institutions, but it does not, it's not GMO. It can be GMO, but it's not necessarily GMO. It can be hybrid, it can be open pollinated, but it's any seed that has gone through a formal breeding program to make it perform better in one way or the other. So let's get started then. Let me just start by presenting this, what I think to be the problem statement for agriculture in Africa. What you see here is 2 graphs. On the left side of the graph, you see average cereal yields across the globe, with North America and Europe having the top line, that's in blue. Then Asia and Latin America being the second 2 graphs that are in green. And then you have the Sub-Saharan Africa being the line that's at the bottom, that's almost flat. Basically, what this is showing you is that there's almost been little or no improvement in yield for key cereals in the continent of Africa over the last, from the 1960s. you can see how Asia and the rest of the world really has gone up in terms of increasing yield. So in a way, almost all the feeding additional people in Africa has come from converting more and more land from wild into agriculture as opposed to increasing yield. So that's the graphic on the left hand the slides. On the right-hand side, you see a graph that shows you population growth from different parts of the world, population projections. You see there that other than, you see when you go to 2020, from 2020 onwards, almost all the global population growth is coming almost exclusively from Africa. The line for Asia, Europe, North America, and South America is almost flat. So by the end of this century, Africa is expected to be the only place where there's significant population growth. To keep a number in mind, at the moment, 3/4 of all Africans are under the age of 35. So 3/4 of the population in Africa is considered youth. I am considered very old when I'm in Africa. So this is quite important to keep in mind. When you put these two graphics together, one that shows you very low agricultural productivity and another one that shows you very rapid population growth, you can see that we're either headed for a humanitarian crisis or an environmental crisis, because either we have to convert more and more land into agriculture, or Africa may not be able to feed itself in the years to come. So this to me is what keeps me awake at night. This is the agency of why we need to intervene when it comes to agricultural development in Africa. Put differently, Africa is yet to experience a green revolution. You have heard this term, and it comes with many connotations for different people, sometimes even negative ones. But what we can establish as fact is that Africa is producing about 4 times the amount of quantity of key cereals that it did in the 1960s. But almost all of that has come from converting more and more land into agriculture. Here's a good example that illustrates this point very well. Africa and US have about the same amount of land under maize, or corn as they call it in the US. On that amount of land, the US produces about 400 million tons of maize, and Africa produces only 60 million tons. So the magnitude of difference there, more than 8 times fold, is the yield gap that people are often discussing. And that does not have to be like that. Several countries in Africa showing that this can be achieved. And the beauty of this green revolution is Africa can do it well this time. It can be a doubly green revolution. So one of the key ingredients for achieving this, closing this yield gap, is that African farmers need to use improved seed. Among other things, they need to mechanize, they need to use more fertilizer, they need to do sustainable methods for soil management. A lot of things that you're hearing in this seminar series. But I think to me, one of the more powerful of those technologies is improved seed. Now, I want you to rethink seed the way you think about it. I know most of you are familiar with seed, just that little kernel of maize and beans that you plant in the soil. But I want you to just bear with me for a second while we reimagine what exactly is seed. What exactly is seed? I'm going to give you another new framework for looking at what seed is. So you all know this, huh? This is a robot. I want you to imagine for a second a future world in which, tiny little robots can be programmed to work for us. They would have amazing software and works flawlessly, and have sufficient battery to work autonomously for years. You've seen this like in movies like I think Big Hero 6. I'm not talking about bad robots that fight our dirty wars. I want you to imagine here good robots, peaceful robots that go out there in remote African villages and deliver good food, immunity against crop diseases, and help farmers adjust to climate change. I've actually termed these new little generation of robots. I call them Hunger Busters 2.0. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you can see.
Can you hear me still?
We can hear you. I think someone unmuted themselves on accident.
Okay, good. So I want to call these technologies Hunger Busters 2.0. So what am I talking about here? I'm talking about the new generation of seed technologies that can impact meaningful changes for smallholder farmers in Africa. Here's an example. The first hunger buster that I'm going to talk to you about as an example is called Bazooka. Bazooka is a new variety of improved seed that smallholder farmers are using in Uganda. It's so called Bazooka because farmers have been experiencing what they call an explosion of yields. So you see there a farmer who has just grown this new variety. It actually comes from CIMMYT, which is a public research institution. I'll tell you a little bit more about it just to excite you about the power of what improved seed can do. So you see here, drought-tolerant maize is a new technology that is being promoted in Africa. There are more than 200 new varieties of what they call drought-tolerant maize. They've been bred by public research institutions, CIMMYT, IATA, National Agricultural Research Organizations, working with the help of farmers. The ultimate objective is to increase production and productivity by smallholder farmers at farm gate level. They are not being bred by private multinational seed companies, for those of you who have reservations about that. This is public materials that is unable to protect farmers against climate change, in the form of drought. There are more than 200 such new varieties that are being deployed around Africa. So think again about that little kernel that I talked about, seed. This little tiny tool has the power, I often call it the perfect marriage between nature and science. Inside seed is genetic information, or you can call it software, that can tell a plant exactly what to do to meet human needs. Nutrition, shelf life, climate adaptability, disease resistance, all this can be encoded within this little kernel of seed. That is, to me, is quite simply amazing. I was watching yesterday the launch of Apple's new computers, and the way they refine and talk about the amazing M1 chip and what it can do, to me, it still is no parallel to this innovation that we call seed, the power of it. Let me excite you a little bit even more than that. The maize genome has more than 2,500 bases of genetic code in it. So if you took every kernel of maize and you look at the DNA fingerprint, it has got more information there than 670 King James Bibles encoded into that little seed. And the beauty of it is that this is simple technology that we take for granted. It's got a battery power that lasts 3 to 5 years of dormancy, and once you put it in the soil with nothing else, soil and water, amazing things start to happen. You can encode this, put it in the soil, and it just starts to germinate like magic. It works. It's been tried and tested for centuries, and it still works. And sometimes we take it for granted what it's able to do to feed the world and deliver all these amazing technologies. So now that you're excited about what seed can do, this is just a software that can be encoded into that little kernel and can do these amazing things for farmers. That variety that I'm talking about, here's an example for the skeptical among us. This is data that I got from CIMMYT. In a normal year, I'm trying to compare here what you'd call farmer recycled seed, which is in blue, versus a drought susceptible hybrid, which is not resistant to this maize lethal necrosis disease, and one that is resistant to both drought and maize lethal necrosis disease. So you can see the yield in a normal year. The farmer saved seed is about 4.5 tons per hectare compared to 7 for the other two. In a drought year, you see the difference. One that gives you 1 ton per hectare, and the drought tolerant one gives you easily 2 or 3 times that yield. When it comes to a year where you have maize lethal necrosis disease, you can see the difference. Farmers are getting 0.5 tons per hectare as opposed to potentially that 6.5 for a variety that is been bred to be resistant to that kind of condition. A visual image, this is a farmer that's showing off their drought-tolerant maize as opposed to one that is not. I think that is amazing. I think this is what we all want agricultural transformation to be. And this is all done with very minimal knowledge on crop management. They plant this much the same way they would any other varieties. Look at the differences. And this is what excites me, to see smallholder farmers with their holding their bazookas out there. Where many varieties only produce one cob of maize per plant. This one is also known as a double cobber. And that's why these farmers are holding 2 cobs of maize in one hand. They're showcasing that, don't mess with us. We have bazookas in our hands and we're food secure. This is what excites me about working in the seed sector. So let's switch gears now to talk about what this technology can do. We know the world is about 5 million smallholder farmers around the world. These 5 million smallholder farmers support upwards of 2 billion people in the world. And many of those people, 78% of them, are the world's poorest people. So when you talk about poverty and development, these kind of technologies can really make a difference. The premise of what I'm going to talk about is that, we know, this is from a report from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It says that investing in agriculture is, the power of investing in agriculture is clear. Agricultural development is 2 to 4 times more effective at reducing hunger and poverty than any other sector. Secondly, I would like to say that improved seed can deliver state-of-the-art technologies, like I've been saying, to farmers. These things include higher yield, disease and pest resistance, climate change adaptation, improved nutrition, such as vitamin E fortification, biofortification, and also, in some cases, longer shelf life. All these things are attributes that breeders can integrate, when they're looking at the needs that farmers are facing, and they can encode this information inside that little kernel of seed. Now let's look at why the levels of adoption of seed in Africa. First of all, accurate data on improved seed adoption is very hard to find. Secondly, when you find it, because it's difficult to measure in some cases, but adoption of improved seed in Africa remains very low by just about every measure. The most comprehensive report by AGRA puts the adoption level for improved seed at about 60% across the African continent. There's wide variation across crops, where maize still enjoys the highest levels. Maize is about 28% in Ethiopia, 43% in Malawi, 35% in Tanzania, and about 54% in Uganda. Other crops outside of maize, the adoption levels remain extremely low, lower than 10%, lower than 5%, which means that in almost all those crops, farmers are using seed that has been used over many generations and carried over from one season to the other. The constraints to adoption, as you find in the literature, they include lack of knowledge, affordability, risk aversion, and some preference to local varieties. But I've always questioned if these are indeed the real reasons why farmers are not adopting. For me, you can ask this bigger question here of, Ed, if improved seed is so great, how come very few farmers in Africa are using this technology? It begs a deeper question than just looking at what farmers are doing at farm gate level. To help answer that question, let me take you to an illustrative example of what a seed value chain looks like in developing countries. It basically consists of 4 different phases: research and development, production and processing, marketing and distribution, and finally, farmer utilization. For the most part in developing countries here in the US and in Europe and parts of Asia, those first 3 stages are often done by one company. In this case, I give an example of Bayer. Bayer does their own research and development, production and processing, and marketing and distribution. And they're these huge conglomerates that deliver all these things ultimately all the way to the farmers. Now, this model, I'm not prescribing it for Africa. It's got its own shortcomings, but it's got the advantages of coordination, integration, economies of scale. Now let's look at what that model looks like when you get to Africa. One year I was invited by USAID to DC along with several other seed experts, and we had one task, and that was to map seed delivery process for maize in one country, and I think we used the example of Uganda. What you see there is actually, if you look on the edges, you see brown things that are, they're actually bricks to give you a sense of magnitude. And these are little posts that are mapped on there, big posts actually. So we filled a whole wall just trying to capture what seed delivery pathway looks like for one country. This was then converted into this very fancy diagram that shows you what the delivery pathway for seed looks like for an African country. The short of this is that it's extremely complicated. There are many, many players in the pathways from research and development out to farmer utilization. They go through many different channels and loops and regulations that are often very, very hard to understand, and the different players often have very different incentives that they're working against. But then it struck me that every complicated system must have several checkpoints along the value chain where you can see if things are working or not. Because ultimately, if you don't see farmers getting seed and you ask yourself that question, what is wrong with the system? You need to be able to identify certain critical points along this value chain that you can start to examine. Think of a car, for example. When your car is not working, there are several points that you can look to see what is where the problem might be. For those of you who are not familiar with the seed system in developing countries like Africa, you have research and development, mostly in the public sector, done by National Agricultural Research Institutions, CG systems, and private companies. Production and processing, that's done by private companies and government parastatals. Marketing distribution is done by rural agro dealers and non-governmental organizations, including Catholic Relief Services, Red Cross, and then your farmer utilization. The thing that I want to point out is that all these different players have different incentives. Some of them are philanthropists, some of them are politicians, some of them are private sector players that are trying to maximize profit. So it's very, very hard to coordinate a system like that. I'll skip through this slide, but it's basically highlighting the fact that when you look at seed sector development in Africa, the different countries are at different phases of the sector development, starting with phase 1, where it's nascent, and you have countries like South Sudan, Liberia, Congo, that are just getting started. You have countries that are in the middle, like Burkina Faso, that are in early growth, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and so forth. And I would say the most advanced, the most mature of those seed sectors is probably South Africa, and I would add there Egypt as well, that are mostly at par with the developed countries such as the US. So looking at all these systems, we came up with a tool. I was spearheading this work, but a lot of other people were partnering in this. But we developed a tool called the African Seed Access Index, starting about 10 years ago as a concept note. But this African Seed Access Index seeks to promote and maintain enabling environments for competitive seed systems serving smallholder farmers in Africa. This tool measures and tracks and compares performance of seed sector across different African countries. In short, the theory of change behind this tool, the African Seed Access Index, is that if we can have evidence-based interventions in 5 key areas: research and development, policy and regulation, industry competitiveness, institutional support, and service to farmers. If we can have evidence-based policy interventions and we can start to move the dial on all those areas, it's going to result in competitive systems serving smallholder farmers. And by those, I mean something that delivers affordability to farmers, high quality seed, available at close to farm gate level, and is also easily accessible. We developed this tool. Right now it has about 22 different indicators under those 5 distinct areas. So I'll give you an example. We look at research and development. We look at the number and adequacy of active breeders. We also look at the number of varieties being released, the availability of basic seed, age of varieties, and percentage of new varieties with special features. That's just in one area. And some of those are measured at crop level. And you can see in the last column there whether they have a positive or negative impact on seed access by smallholder farmers. You can look at measures of competitiveness. We want this to be competitive, so we look at the number of active seed companies, the market concentration, the market share of government companies, and the efficiency of seed import and export processes. We have some other measures of seed policy and regulatory reform, including the status of the policy framework, the implementation of seed regulations. When it comes to institutional support, we look at the seed sector coordination. We also look at the National Seed Trade Association and look at the strength. And ultimately, we look at the service to smallholder farmers. That includes availability of extension services, concentration of rural agro dealers, availability of seed in small packages that are affordable to farmers. We look at seed to price grain ratio to look at affordability, and we also look at the degree of customer orientation. So that's kind of in a nutshell what the TASAI indicators look like. How do we actually do the work itself? Let me run you through the methods before I go through the results. We conduct in-depth country studies in every country, and this work is done by local seed experts. We give them the framework. We look at 4 key crops that are grain or legume that are the most important to smallholder farmers because we can't cover every crop. We have a lot of stakeholder engagement in the research design, implementation, dissemination, and advocacy. And the research combines both primary data from industry surveys and key informants by people who know the sector very well. There's a combination of quantitative and qualitative indicators across most of the variables, and all the different reports and outputs that we produce are summarized into country briefs that are very accessible to policy and policymakers in the country and the other decision makers. We also track industry opinion, which is rated from extremely poor to excellent in those color codes that I'm going to kind of unpack in a few more minutes. We've done this work already, and we've covered 21 countries with comprehensive seed sector diagnostics. We've done multiple rounds of studies in DRC, Ghana, Kenya, Malawi, South Africa, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. Multiple rounds of studies have been done in those countries. In industry surveys, when we do them, they cover almost every seed company that's producing the key crops of interest. So you can see from this map here that the coverage of this work is quite impressive. Just to show you, this is not just people sitting and doing desk work. In each of the countries, we have people, 2 or 3 people that are actually doing the work of gathering the data and information. I do like to showcase that, lately we've tried to also include as much as possible participation of women in the research itself. This is some of the researchers that we work with that are very well established experts on seed sector in the countries where they work in. You can see, for example, in the case of Mozambique, both researchers are women. Nigeria, both we see women are participating in this work as well, which is quite a welcome improvement, as much as we're trying to include gender dynamics into part of what this tool is trying to measure. The focus crops that we work with, remember I said that we take 4 key crops per country. You can see for cereals, maize is the most popular crop. So we track maize across all the different African countries. We also look at rice, sorghum, wheat, pearl millet, and sunflower, and teff. Teff is only for Ethiopia. And for legumes, we look at beans, soybean, cowpeas, groundnut, and pigeon peas. And the most popular crop happens to be sugar beans for the legumes. So now I'm going to share with you some of the key results that we're finding out. What are the key findings to date? Here's an example. When it comes to number of varieties that are being released, these graphs show you the 3-year moving average of number of varieties released per country. So these are almost like new innovations almost think of them in the world of cell phones, how many new cell phones are being launched each year, being released. You can see that maize is the dominant crop that is the most amount of varieties being released in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Tanzania. The key take-home point here is that the breeding programs are still very much dominated by maize. When it comes to the second and third and fourth crops, such as rice, groundnut, and bean, there's very little activity. The numbers drop from more than 15 or upwards of 20 in some countries for maize. But once you get to the other crops, you're talking about an average of 1 or 2 variety releases per year. Something that should be of concern to people who want to focus on nutrition. Next, you can see the comparison of number of maize varieties by countries. Here's an example of how much research and development is taking place. South Africa per year is having an average of 236 new varieties, followed by Kenya at 98. And after that, it goes down here, Tanzania at 44. And some countries have 0, Sierra Leone, Madagascar, Burkina Faso. To be fair to those countries, maize is not as important. I think rice is much more dominant. But the key point to take home is that you can see an example of countries that are doing well in R&D versus ones that are not doing that well. Okay, that's the same information again. When you look at the price of maize seed variety, I'll use maize because it's very illustrative. When you look at the price which you track, these are the prices. Hybrid maize are in green and open pollinated varieties of maize in yellow. 2 key points I want to make. First, this technology is not expensive by any measure. This is the price of 1 kg of maize. OPV is averaging about $1 per kg, and hybrids are averaging about $2 to $3 per kg in most of the countries. So a farmer who has maybe 2 or 3 acres needs an average of 5 to 10 kgs. So you're talking about $15 to $20 in terms of investment. Given the returns that can come from this, I don't want to downplay the cost, but this is not as much as what you would expect with other technologies. It's quite significantly affordable. The number of active seed companies, again, you look at the comparison across countries. Nigeria, for those top 4 crops, it upwards of more than 300 companies, most of them very small. The other countries have way less than that, under 50. And some countries such as Sierra Leone and Burundi only have 3 to 4 companies that are active there. We think that the more companies you have, the more competition you're likely to have, and we want to promote healthy competition in this sector. When it comes to market share owned by companies, this shows you here the top 4 companies across the different countries. In the countries where the seed sector is developed or mature, such as South Africa, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Kenya, you are starting to see significant consolidations where the big 4 companies can control more than 90% of the market share. And in countries that are just getting started up, the industry is still very, very competitive, and you have much more players there, and you don't have domination by a handful of seed companies. So this is also very important to track, because in the developed world here, there's a lot of monopolies, and we're trying to make sure that Africa does not grow on the same pathway where only a handful of companies control the entire market. There's something called seed inspectors, and these are required to make sure that we maintain good quality seed. And you can see some countries have more than others. They can be private or public. South Africa has, for those crops, about 180. Zambia has a total of about 83. After that, the numbers start to get very, very low. And this is very, very important, because seed is one of those technologies that is indistinguishable from grain. And the only way to ensure that farmers are getting good quality seed is to have a significant number of well-resourced inspectors who are going out there to make sure that it's produced under the highest quality, and that the seed that farmers are being given is what it promises to be. So you can see countries like Liberia has had 1 seed inspector. Sierra Leone, you're talking about 5. Burundi, Rwanda, you're talking about less than 10 seed inspectors for the entire country, who are expected to cover the entire country. So we're encouraging governments to invest more in that area as well. The average length of variety release, this is the time it takes to develop a variety to get it out to the market. This ranges from about a year in Burundi to about 4 years in countries such as Ethiopia. So we are trying to shorten this period for variety release so that you have more and more technologies available to farmers in a very short time space. One of the things that TASAI is starting to do now, because we've done these rounds of studies over multiple years, is that we're trying to track progress, not just across countries, but across time. Here's an example of the progress that governments are making to address fake seed as measured by industry opinion. It starts off in 2013 with only 39% of the seed companies thinking that government was doing enough. And then in the year 2017, with a lot of engagement from TASAI, governments put in place policies and technologies that were to mitigate against fake seed. Fake seed here is just grain that's being marketed on the market as seed. And you can see the difference in performance across the years, that improvement that you see. And this is all what we're trying to impact on most of the seed sectors. How is this seed information being used? The data, I would say in about 3 different ways. One of it is with shaping and informing government policy and regulation and institutional reform. We are trying to encourage African governments to reform the sector in a way that allows private sector to do better. For example, in DRC, we're helping the government design the policy and regulatory frame. In Nigeria, where this information is being utilized to develop a national seed roadmap that came out in February of this year. A lot of development partners are using this information for investment priorities and programming, including African Development Bank, Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, African Union Commission. All these are players that are investing a lot of resources in this sector, and they're using some of this information to shape their priorities for engagement. And private companies use this information for market intelligence, and most seed companies also come to this information to see where they should be investing more of their resources in. To summarize, the 10 emerging lessons that we're getting from TASAI to date is that 1, maize is still dominating the breeding programs. We're trying to encourage public investment to go to other crops as well. 2nd, we've noticed that odd varieties continue to persist. Farmers like the odd tried and tested varieties, but those varieties often lack the latest technology, and we're trying to have higher variety turnover. It's the equivalent of farmers being stuck on the 1st generation Nokia cell phones and are refusing to adopt the newer technologies coming on the market. We're seeing a growth in private sector in most countries, led by private, locally owned seed companies in most of the countries. We're seeing the industry consolidating in countries that have much more mature seed sectors, such as South Africa and Zambia and Zimbabwe. We're also experiencing a diminishing role of government in seed production, and we think this is good. We think this ultimately should be done by private sector. Notable improvements are being observed in regional seed import and export process. We really think that the future for Africa is for seed to be able to move easily across states so that you have one big market in several regions. We're also seeing that most countries have very good well-designed policy instruments, but they do not have the resources to implement them well. So there's still a very big gap between policy design and the implementation itself. You're starting to see a rapid privatization of seed inspection service. So the private sector is stepping in to take over roles that were previously only done by government. And something that keeps me awake is this persistent challenge of fake seed. It has become very, very easy to go out there on the market and produce something that looks like seed and sell it to farmers. And farmers only find out in a few months that this technology is not what it promised to be. This can be very, very detrimental, and we're trying to encourage governments to invest in addressing the challenge. We also see a vital role for seed trade associations is representing the industry, especially in terms of engagements with government. I want to leave it at that and open up the rest of the time for Q&A and discussion, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from you. Those that want to learn more about this work, I could not do enough justice for studies that cover 22 countries over multiple years, but you can go to a website called TASAI.org and you can get more information on some of this work. That is a collaboration between Cornell University, TASAI Inc., and a few other development partners where we are the knowledge partner delivering on this work. So with that, I'd like to open it up to Q&A and discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed. That is really fascinating and important work. I'd like to invite people to formulate their questions while you're thinking of one. I do have one in the chat that I'd like to get started with. And the question is, what do you do to ensure the varieties you distribute meet the needs of farmers and are adapted to farmer conditions?
That's a very good question. And I have to say that this variety release is quite an elaborate process. For you to have a variety taken to market, it has to go through several processes that are quite well regulated. They include something called GUS, distinctiveness, uniformity, and stability. So before you release a variety out there, it goes through a very rigorous inspection that it claims to be what it is done by government in public research institutions. A variety cannot be given to farmers until it has met those very rigorous inspection services. Think of this as the FDA kind of approving vaccines. They go through a lot of testing. They go through randomized controlled trials. There is somebody out there who is looking out for the interest of the smallholder farmer, and that person is in the public domain. No variety gets out there to farmers until it has cleared all these different measures, including biosafety and other measures.
So I invite anyone who has a question to either raise your hand in the participant list or submit it via chat. And while we're waiting for more questions, there are a couple more, but I did want to ask a quick one, Ed. I'm really curious about, there's been so much emphasis recently on so-called climate smart agriculture. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering if that push is generating any more demand on the part of farmers for the climate adapted seed. In the last few years. Is that making any difference that so much investment is being put in climate smart agriculture research, technology, and extension? Another
excellent question. I'll answer it in 3 parts very quickly. One is that there's so many other complementary technologies that go into that climate smart agriculture, and seed integrates very well to any one of those. So you can talk about soil management, you can talk about water management. To me, seed fits in with any of those other solutions. It's not, it can be embedded. It doesn't have to be a standalone. It has to be contextualized with other technologies. 2, as climate is changing, it means that there are some, varieties that were already being used in other parts of the world that are drier, that can now be moved to other parts of the world. So it's not like you don't have to reinvent these new varieties all the time. You just have to say the climate now in Kenya is where Sudan was, 10 years ago. So we have the benefit of being able to move technology from one country to another one. The third one is that indeed there's a lot of emphasis now in the breeding programs to have climate change adaptability. And this is not just about drought. You're talking about flooding, waterlogging, pests and diseases that come with all these challenges. Almost all the public breeding efforts are trying to respond to that. You can be assured even private sector, their motive is to sell more and more technology, so they have to respond to the needs of the farmer. And part of that is getting varieties that meet farmers' challenges.
Great answer. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have someone thanking you for the amazing talk and asking, what What kinds of things are they doing in Africa to encourage farmers to grow crops other than maize?
Another fantastic question. First of all, farmers grow what they want to grow. Farmers are a very stubborn bunch. I know that being coming from one of, raised on one of those myself. So there's several efforts. There's a push to nutrition. Other crops such as, for example, orange flesh sweet potatoes that offer much more nutrition are being promoted out there. But another very subtle point, again, is this pushback around maize, is that maize also happens to deliver certain things to farmers that farmers really like. One of those, especially if you're concerned about amount of time that women invest in Africa in processing food. So most of the African countries used to have many small grains such as teff, sorghum, millet. These are all very good, by the way, in terms of nutrition-wise. But most of them had extensive hours needed to be spent in the between harvesting and preparing them for food. And much of that work fell on women, especially young girls. So as much as maize has adverse nutritional components, it's also come with several things that farmers like. They like the way it tastes. They like the way you can just harvest, store, and the processing is fairly easy. So there has to be a balance. And I think ultimately we want to have farmers that can grow, maize along with legumes and have a balance both for crop rotation and also for nutrition.
Very good, thanks. In general, are most new seed varieties produced with the use of irrigation, fertilizer, and pesticide inputs?
Yes, for maize. So there's two parts to this. So if you are a breeder, they like to work on what we call like laboratory conditions. Like here at Cornell, they would like to produce their maize under these ideal conditions where they're trying to push the frontiers of productivity. If we just change the genetics and we feed this crop the right way with the right nutrients, what can it do? But there's also a test there for a push for testing this on farmer fields. On farmer conditions, what does it actually do? So one of it is a controlled laboratory environment, much like, to get back to my example of vaccines, one of it is you are controlling this with animal testing. And then the phase 2 is when we take it out there to the farmers and the community and see how it performs. So there is a mix of those two areas. And I think you have to do both. They're not mutually exclusive. I wish there would be more of those trials that are done with farmer participation. But most of the breeding programs right now are very farmer-centered from the beginning in the design. So you're seeing more and more of that push.
Oh, that's excellent. Very good. And next, do breeding efforts compete with each other for funding? And how can we balance the need for maize seed varieties with more funding for a more diverse array of seed varieties to promote diversification on farms?
Yes, they do compete, and they do compete aggressively. Most of these are separate institutions, in the public sector. They do compete for resources, and the good news is there is a push now towards those of you that are aware of the CGIAR system. This is a consortium of public research institutions around the world. They compete for funding. Maybe the good and bad news is that they're competing from the same sources. So maybe like Gates is putting a lot of investment in that sector, USAID, and a few other governments. There's now a push to move them into more consolidation towards one CG system. I think this will ultimately change the investment priorities. This maize push is also something that the donors are very aware of, and they're starting to put new incentives into other crops as well, such as high iron bean, orange flesh sweet potato. So the donor money, because most of this is public research, is what is going to influence that direction of investment from just maize to maize and other crops.
Okay, well, we're almost out of time, but I want to ask one more, which has been up for a little while now. And that is about connecting farmers to marketplace. For rural places with transportation difficulty, are there programs in place to help farmers sell their products at a good price?
Yes, I would say that this is a good topic for almost another day. I do like to think that, yes, if you are to be holistic about these solutions, you need to give farmers technologies that allow them to produce more. but you need to get them access to market so that they can convert this additional yield into money that they can then use to take their kids to school or to hospitals. The pathway to impact involves market participation where they can make this money. There is many programs that are working on that front. In this world of development, I often like to use this example of, the millipede. It's got 1,000, 100 legs. Like if you try to solve all of them, to move all of them at the same time, you can just freeze and not do anything. That's what the challenge of development is. The TASAI team and myself, we are trying to move the seed leg forward. The other legs that need to be moved, including fertilizer, market access, irrigation, mechanization, women participation, all these are multiple legs of development in agricultural development that all need to be moved in the same direction. This emphasis here is just to get seed to the farmers and allow other people to develop in other fronts. The beauty of this technology is that it's almost compatible with all these other things that we're talking about. Market access. With the best seed, you can get to market faster. With best seed, you can have better returns to irrigation. With best seed, you can get better returns to mechanization. So it's a technology that lives well with other technologies and other interventions.
Beautiful, beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much, Ed. Really fascinating talk, and I'm sure others will agree. If you want to unmute yourself if you're allowed to.
Thank you all.
So
It's been fun. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you.
Thanks, all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.